In that storm, Kyle wasn't just a sniper, he was his friend's last hope. With zero visibility, wind howling, and sand covering everything, what Kyle needed to do transcended mathematics. This was about instinct. The sandstorm hit Ramadi at 1,347 hours with the fury of an ancient biblical plague. Within minutes, the bright afternoon sun vanished behind a wall of swirling sand and debris that reduced visibility to mere yards. Staff Sergeant Kyle pressed himself against the concrete barrier on the rooftop of a 4-story building, feeling the full force of nature's assault against his position. Through his radio, Kyle could hear the increasingly desperate communications from Marine units scattered throughout the sector. The massive sandstorm hadn't just reduced visibility, it had created tactical chaos that insurgent forces were exploiting with deadly effectiveness. All stations, this is Bravo Company, the radio crackled with barely controlled panic. We are taking heavy casualties from coordinated enemy fire. Multiple wounded, requesting immediate medical evacuation. Storm conditions preventing air support. Kyle tried to peer through his Schmidt and Bender scope, but the optics were useless in these conditions. Sand particles struck his face with stinging force, and the wind howled with such intensity that normal radio communication was barely possible. This was warfare in conditions that challenged every assumption about modern military capabilities. Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison, Kyle's spotter, crawled closer to communicate without using radio frequencies that might be compromised. "Chris, this is insane. Nobody can shoot in these conditions. We can't see 20 meters in any direction." Kyle understood Morrison's assessment was tactically sound. Sandstorms of this magnitude typically suspended all sniper operations until atmospheric conditions improved. But the Marine communications Kyle was monitoring indicated that waiting wasn't an option. American forces were being overrun while the storm provided perfect concealment for enemy attacks. "Overwatch, this is Charlie Company Actual." Major Robert Sterling's voice cut through the radio static with unmistakable urgency. "My Marines are pinned down approximately 400 meters northeast of your position. Enemy forces are advancing under cover of the storm. We need immediate sniper support." Kyle checked his compass and tried to orient toward the northeast, but visual confirmation was impossible. The sandstorm had created a brown twilight that obscured everything beyond 20 meters. Traditional sniper techniques, visual target acquisition, range estimation, environmental assessment were completely useless. But Kyle was beginning to understand that this situation would require something beyond traditional techniques. The Marines depending on his support were facing imminent death or capture, and conventional military doctrine offered no solutions for precision shooting in zero visibility conditions. "Major Sterling, this is Overwatch," Kyle responded. "Current weather conditions make visual target acquisition impossible. I cannot engage targets I cannot see. Overwatch, I understand your limitations, but my Marines are dying. Enemy forces are advancing on our position using the storm as concealment. If they're not stopped within the next 10 minutes, my entire company will be overrun." Kyle felt the weight of impossible responsibility settling on his shoulders. Military training had prepared him for challenging shooting conditions: wind, rain, extreme temperatures, poor lighting, but nothing in his experience had addressed conducting precision fire missions in complete atmospheric blindness. Morrison positioned himself close enough to Kyle that they could communicate without radio. "Brother, there's got to be another way to help those Marines. Maybe we can coordinate artillery strikes or request immediate air support." Kyle considered these alternatives while listening to increasingly desperate radio traffic from Marine units throughout the sector. Artillery strikes in urban environments carried enormous risks of collateral damage, and air support was impossible in current weather conditions. The Marines were trapped in a tactical nightmare with no conventional solutions, but Kyle's mind was working through unconventional possibilities. His training had emphasized that successful snipers must adapt their methods to overcome environmental challenges that would stop less capable marksmen. Maybe there was a way to engage targets without relying on visual acquisition. "Charlie Company, this is Overwatch," Kyle transmitted. "I need you to describe your tactical situation in detail. Location of friendly forces, direction of enemy approach, estimated ranges to hostile positions." Major Sterling's response came immediately. "Enemy forces approaching from the north and northwest, estimated distance 150 to 200 meters from our position. My Marines are positioned behind concrete barriers at grid coordinates 32 SMD 847 291. Hostiles are advancing in squad-sized elements using the storm for concealment." Kyle quickly calculated the geometry involved. Charlie Company was approximately 400 meters northeast of his position, with enemy forces approaching from their north and northwest. This meant Kyle's potential targets were positioned roughly 300 to 350 meters from his location, depending on their exact positions relative to the Marine defensive line. The mathematical challenge was staggering. Kyle would need to engage targets he couldn't see at ranges he could only estimate, using environmental cues that were nearly impossible to detect in current conditions. Traditional ballistic calculations were meaningless when wind speed, direction, and atmospheric density were changing unpredictably every few seconds. "Morrison, I'm going to try something that's never been attempted under these conditions," Kyle announced. "I'm going to use sound triangulation and coordinate geometry to engage targets without visual acquisition." Morrison stared at Kyle through the swirling sand. "Chris, that's impossible. You can't hit what you can't see, especially at 300+ meters in these wind conditions." Kyle was already working through the theoretical framework for what he was attempting. Sound travels at approximately 343 meters per second under normal conditions, but atmospheric density and temperature variations in a sandstorm would affect acoustic properties. However, muzzle flashes and explosive sounds from enemy weapons might provide directional information that could be used for targeting. "Charlie Company, this is Overwatch. I need your Marines to mark their exact positions with infrared strobes. Then I need real-time reports on the direction and estimated distance of enemy muzzle flashes. Overwatch, infrared strobes are active. Enemy fire is coming from bearing 340 degrees relative to our position, estimated 180 to 220 meters from our forward elements." Kyle began the most complex ballistic calculation of his military career, working entirely from coordinates, estimated ranges, and directional information provided by Marines under fire. He had no visual confirmation of targets, no ability to observe environmental conditions at the target area, and no way to spot his own shots for correction. Using his map and compass, Kyle calculated that enemy positions were approximately 320 meters from his location, bearing approximately 035 degrees from his current position. Wind conditions at his location were gusting between 60 and 80 kilometers per hour from the west-southwest, but wind patterns at the target area might be completely different. Kyle made his best estimate of the ballistic solution required: elevation adjustment for 320 meters, significant windage compensation for the estimated crosswind, an allowance for the possibility that atmospheric density variations might affect bullet trajectory in unpredictable ways. His breathing slowed despite the chaos surrounding him. Kyle understood that what he was attempting had never been successfully accomplished under these conditions. He was essentially conducting blind fire at extended range using nothing but mathematical calculations and directional information from Marines under attack. Taking the shot, Kyle announced over the radio. The Macmillan TAC-338 fired into the swirling brown chaos of the sandstorm. Kyle had no idea if the bullet had found its target. There was no way to observe impact or assess results in current visibility conditions. "Charlie Company, this is Overwatch. Report impact." 10 seconds of radio silence felt like an eternity. Then Major Sterling's voice cut through the static with obvious relief. "Overwatch, excellent shooting. Enemy fire from that position has ceased. We observed one hostile down, approximately 180 meters north of our position." Kyle felt a surge of amazement mixed with professional satisfaction. His blind shot had actually found its target, eliminating an enemy fighter who had been threatening Marine positions. But the tactical situation required immediate follow-up. One eliminated target wouldn't be sufficient to relieve pressure on the surrounded Marines. "Charlie Company, continue providing directional information on enemy positions. I'm engaging additional targets." Over the next 20 minutes, Kyle conducted the most extraordinary shooting exhibition of his military career. Using nothing but coordinate geometry, acoustic triangulation, and mathematical calculations, he eliminated 4 enemy combatants in conditions that made visual shooting impossible. Each shot required complete reliance on information provided by Marines under fire, ballistic calculations performed without environmental confirmation, and shooting techniques that had never been tested under combat conditions. Kyle was essentially inventing new sniper doctrine in real time while American lives hung in the balance. "Overwatch, this is Charlie Company Actual." Major Sterling's voice carried profound gratitude. "Your fire support has been absolutely critical. Enemy pressure on our position has decreased significantly. How the hell are you making those shots in zero visibility?" Kyle considered how to explain what he'd accomplished. "Major, I'm using coordinate-based firing techniques with acoustic targeting. It's not something we train for, but desperate situations require innovative solutions. What Kyle didn't mention was the psychological pressure involved in conducting precision fire missions without any visual feedback. Each shot was an act of faith based on mathematical calculations and trust in information provided by Marines whose own situational awareness was limited by storm conditions. Morrison watched Kyle's performance with growing amazement. "Chris, what you're doing is impossible according to every sniper manual ever written. You're hitting targets you can't see at ranges you can only estimate in weather conditions that should make accurate shooting impossible." Kyle was already calculating his next shot based on updated positional information from Charlie Company. Enemy forces were apparently trying to flank the Marine position from the east, requiring Kyle to engage targets at a different range and bearing than his previous shots. The technical challenge kept escalating. Each new target required fresh calculations based on different geometries, estimated ranges that might be inaccurate, and environmental conditions that were changing constantly as the storm evolved. Kyle's fifth shot eliminated an enemy fighter who had been attempting to position an RPG launcher for an attack on Marine positions. The round struck true despite the chaos around them, the invisible flight path guided entirely by calculation and coordination rather than sight. That fighter had moved with deliberate intent, hunched behind a low berm as he wrestled the launcher into a firing posture. When the tracer never appeared and the explosion never came, the company knew something extraordinary had occurred. The shot was taken at an estimated range of 380 meters based entirely on coordinate calculations and directional information provided by forward observers, who called in bearings and metered distances with a steady voice over the headset. Kyle had translated those dry numbers into action, converting maps and compass azimuths into a single, lethal solution that found its mark. "Outstanding shooting, Overwatch," reported Charlie Company, voices thick with relief and a new, guarded admiration. "RPG threat neutralized. Your precision fire support is the only thing preventing our position from being overrun." The message echoed across the net and lingered in Kyle's earpiece like validation. For the Marines on the ground it was more than praise, it was a hard acknowledgement that the line between survival and catastrophe had been drawn by that invisible bullet. Around him, men exhaled as if a collective breath they had been holding for hours had finally been released. As the afternoon progressed, the sandstorm began showing signs of gradual weakening. The abrasive wind that had clawed at faces and filled mouths with grit eased its ferocity little by little, and visibility improved slightly from 20 meters to perhaps 30 or 40 meters. Even with that small gain, the world remained a haze of shifting dunes and muted silhouettes. Traditional sniper techniques, careful observation, breath control, timing linked to visible target motion, the familiar sight picture through glass remained impossible. Kyle continued engaging targets using his improvised acoustic and coordinate-based methods, listening for the thump of distant footsteps, the scrape of fabric, the muffled clank of weaponry shifting position, and matching those sounds to the coordinates the observers fed him. He refined his internal models of the battlefield in real time, estimating elevation changes, adjusting for crosswind gusts he could not see, and mentally overlaying probable enemy routes on the blank, wind-whipped map of the terrain. By 1630 hours, Kyle had eliminated 7 enemy combatants using techniques that had never been documented in military literature. Each hit was a confirmation of the makeshift system he'd built from intuition, training, and nerves honed to a razor's edge. His success rate, 7 hits from 8 shots taken in zero visibility conditions, represented a level of improvisation and skill that challenged every assumption about the limitations of precision shooting. For every successful engagement, there had been a calculation, a tiny gamble against unknown variables, and in 7 separate instances the gamble had paid off. "All stations, this is Charlie Company Actual," Major Sterling broadcast over the tactical frequency, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Enemy contact has ceased. Hostile forces appear to have withdrawn under continued pressure from precision sniper fire. Overwatch's performance today has been absolutely extraordinary." The announcement traveled back through the chain of command and into the small circle of men who had watched the fight from the edges, reshaping how they would recount the day to others. Kyle secured his weapon and began considering the implications of what he'd accomplished. He ran his fingers along the bolt and then the stock, methodically clearing and stowing the rifle as if the physical routine would anchor the strangeness of the moment. He had successfully adapted sniper techniques to overcome environmental challenges that military doctrine considered insurmountable. The methods he developed, melding acoustic cues, forward observer grids, and dead reckoning marksmanship, might have applications for future operations in similarly challenging conditions, saving lives where doctrine alone would fail. He thought about the log entries that would be written, the after-action reports, and the faces of young marksmen who might one day train with these improvised tactics. Morrison approached Kyle as the storm continued its gradual weakening, boots sinking into the wind-polished sand. "Chris, what you did today was impossible," he said, voice low and incredulous. "You eliminated 7 targets you couldn't see using methods that don't exist in any training manual." Morrison's words were part praise, part disbelief, and Kyle felt the gravity of them settle in his chest. Around them, the desert returned to an uneasy quiet, and both men knew the day had altered more than just a single firefight. It had pushed the boundaries of what they thought was possible. Kyle considered Morrison's observation while cleaning sand from his rifle's action. "Sometimes impossible is just a limitation we accept because we haven't been forced to find alternatives. Those Marines needed support, so we found a way to provide it." Over the following weeks, Kyle's performance during the sandstorm became legendary within SEAL and Marine communities. Word spread about the sniper who had conducted successful fire missions in zero-visibility conditions, using improvised techniques that defied conventional understanding of precision shooting limitations. Military training commands requested detailed after-action reports describing Kyle's methods. His coordinate-based targeting techniques were studied as potential additions to advanced sniper curricula, representing innovations that could enhance capabilities in extreme weather conditions. But for Kyle personally, the sandstorm engagement reinforced his understanding that exceptional performance often required abandoning conventional methods in favor of creative solutions developed under pressure. Military training provided foundational skills, but combat effectiveness sometimes demanded thinking beyond established doctrine. Major Sterling recommended Kyle for a Bronze Star for his actions during the sandstorm, describing his performance as innovative tactical thinking and exceptional marksmanship under impossible conditions that directly contributed to preservation of American lives. Kyle's 7 confirmed kills during the storm were officially recorded as precision fire missions conducted in severely degraded visibility conditions. The specific techniques he'd used were classified and studied by military research teams interested in expanding sniper capabilities for extreme weather operations. 6 months later, Kyle's improvised acoustic targeting methods had been incorporated into experimental training programs for elite military marksmen. His innovations during a single afternoon in Ramadi had contributed to doctrinal changes that would influence sniper training for years to come. But Kyle would always remember the sandstorm engagement as the day he learned that impossible was often just another word for untried. When American lives depended on solutions that didn't exist, exceptional warriors found ways to make the impossible routine. The storm had tested every skill Kyle possessed: technical knowledge, mathematical ability, creative thinking, and psychological resilience under extreme pressure. His success had demonstrated that elite performance sometimes required transcending the limitations that others accepted as insurmountable. Years later, when Kyle wrote about his military experiences, he would describe the sandstorm engagement as one of his most challenging and significant accomplishments. Not because of the number of targets eliminated, but because it represented the day he learned that true expertise meant adapting capabilities to overcome circumstances that conventional wisdom considered impossible. In that storm, Kyle had indeed been his friend's last hope. And when mathematics wasn't enough, his instincts had bridged the gap between impossible and inevitable.
See you in the next videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe.